that the future model of education is already emerging. He says the emerging model flips the current approach of expensive textbooks, closed research, and limited access to classroom-based learning on its head. Instead, featuring open course materials, open access to scholarly research, and internet-based courses that can accommodate many students simultaneously. The concern in Canada is that other countries are becoming first adapters, while Canada lags behind. So why is it important to learn transnational literacies? Globalization's generating a variety of claims about education and global change. I'm going to skip a little bit here since I think I've talked a bit about transnational literacies already. But I want to draw your attention to the contention that globalization is a struggle over knowledge of world affairs. It involves a struggle over how world affairs should be organized and whose interests they should serve. As Boaventura Sousa de Santos argues, there is no global social justice without global cognitive justice. Education has always served as an instrument in the service of governing powers, but at the same time it has provided the potential to serve as a democratizing and emancipatory force. So we know that with the rise of neoliberalism, education's being marketized and redefined as a commodity to be sold by profit-seeking businesses. With the World Education Forum, our team believes another world is not only possible, but also necessary. And education has a role to play in imagining and realizing that better world, but to do so, education itself also needs to change. So I have a section on the global and local context for our work. Number one, education matters because globalization involves a struggle over knowledge of world affairs. And that struggle is reflected in the different ways in which education is currently understood. It's a mechanism both for facilitating social inclusion and meeting labor force needs. It's treated as both a public sector provision and a market sector growth area. There's confusion between its vocational and academic functions and disputes about which should be privileged. So number two, we believe that professional and technological education cannot be divorced from more academic analysis of history, culture, and society without endangering the sustainable development of humanity, the earth, and all earthly creatures. Number three, research production and dissemination are changing their character with the rise of digital technologies and the changing needs of globalizing societies. Within educational communities, learning communities are now being recognized as co-producers of knowledge. Number four, collaboration, complexity, and creativity are the key components of new learning cultures, and these prioritize learning, participation, and process over teaching, reception, and content. They valorize student autonomy. So in some ways, these are to be welcomed, but in other ways, perhaps questioned. They certainly require more investigation. Number five, we're told we're entering a new economic era in which a knowledge economy is replacing an industrial economy. And in this era, students are renamed as consumers of the kind of education that can transform them into human capital or highly qualified personnel, HQP, as we call them in Canada. So student agency is limited to choosing which courses to follow in search of training that will make them employable. As the world economy globalizes and markets become more competitive, employability becomes a more serious concern. Under these conditions, training becomes the preferred word for how educators interact with our students. 6, insofar as training is seen as purely instrumentalist, it's been traditionally devalued in relation to learning and the search for knowledge. It is now being revalued. 7, training in the protocols of an academic discipline is now being replaced by training in the kind of skills the job market values. In learning a discipline, students learn a form of academic literacy that designates their personal sense of the public readerships associated with that discipline. In our transitional moment, students still need to learn such specialized languages, but they also need to learn how to communicate across them. And I suggest national cultures work in a similar way. Therefore, establishing connections across these borders becomes a priority. 8, given the widespread belief that interdisciplinarity is increasingly necessary to address the complexity of problems in an interdependent world, researchers in the decolonizing humanities need to address more carefully how to make interdisciplinary work for our emancipatory agendas. 9, the tendency to think about training as a process that can be separated from humanistic forms of learning needs to be questioned. So does the tendency to separate teaching from research in public discourse about education. An understanding of the ways in which new learning cultures integrate learning, training, and research is going to be essential as the disciplines reinvent themselves to meet the challenges of an interdependent world. So why Canada and Brazil? I'll just very briefly say that this is part of the regionalization turn in globalization studies. Agencies in both countries and globally have identified similar concerns, so it's quite clear that we can learn from each other. I was told I had 40 minutes when I prepared this, and I now have 20, so I'm cutting a few sections in order to finish within my time. So why global English from a critical perspective? We recognize that today competence in the English language is necessary but not sufficient. All teaching of English today needs to recognize that we live in a world of polyglot nations in which multilingualism and multiculturalism have become a necessity for most world citizens. In this kind of context, cross-national partnerships such as ours have an important role to play in positioning our students for a networked age. So I talk about the importance of globalizing the research imagination to seriously consider the epistemological and ontological implications of globalization for research and teaching in the humanities and social sciences. So how do we engage the digital? Well, the summary of findings from the US-based Digital Youth Project in 2008 concluded that participation in the digital age means more than being able to access online information and culture. Youth could benefit from education being more open to forms of experimentation and social exploration that are generally not characteristic of educational institutions. And these authors conclude with a series of questions we too are asking. How can each partner take full advantage of the learning opportunities made available through new media? redesign spaces of learning through developing revised forms of community, of partnerships and networks, and ensure that new literacies associated with new media are integrated creatively within critical and transnational literacy perspectives. New technologies offer potentially transformative possibilities for imagining connections across previously distant communities. The original enthusiasm about the potential of the internet is now giving way, however, to some concerns. A report in 2012 called Young Canadians in a Wired World, Phase 3, Teachers' Perspectives, was prepared for the Media Awareness Network, and it concluded that simple access to the internet has not made Canadian students better learners. Despite their facility with online tools, many students lack the skills they need to use these effectively for learning or to evaluate their authority or credibility. So the report raises 5 factors that teachers need to think about more carefully. Number 1, teaching technology versus using technology to teach. The mistake the researchers and the teachers noted is that many teachers simply train students how to use technology, something they already often know or can pick up very quickly, instead of providing them with learning opportunities that are enhanced through the use of these tools.